and welcome back to Design Driven, a collaboration from Homepage News, Springboard Futures, and the Inspired Home Show. I'm Tom Mirabile, principal and founder of Springboard and trend analyst and forecaster for the IHA. The mission of Design Driven is to bring intelligence and inspiration on the evolving role of design in the home and housewares marketplace. We invite industry-leading design and style experts to the table, and we talk to them about everything from what's new to preparing for what's next, in color, materials, form, function, and everything in between. In this episode, we're going to be talking about ESG. The acronym stands for Environment, Social, and Governance. There are three overlapping concerns that are affecting home industry products from design through manufacturing and all the way to sales. To explore ESG, its evolution, and how some in our industry are responding, we'll be speaking with Jane Mosbacher Morris, founder and CEO of To The Market. It's a company that helps businesses of all sizes navigate environmental, social, and governance issues in home manufacturing and also in retail market spaces. Jane has worked in the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Counterterrorism and the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues. She's also served as a term member at the Council on Foreign Relations. In 2020, Fortune magazine named Jane one of the 25 world's greatest leaders because of her response to COVID-19. Her book, Buy the Change You Want to See, is #1 consumer guide on Amazon. It was also the #1 new release in business ethics on Amazon, and it's a Target nonfiction bestseller. She's featured by CNN. She's been featured on Bloomberg and in Forbes, among others. So let's join Jane to discuss the expanding role of ESG in home and housewares. Jane Mosbacher Morris, welcome. It's wonderful having you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Jane, your company To The Market has been getting a lot of attention and praise from various concerns in the business community for a rather innovative approach to more ethical and sustainable business practices for companies large and small. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to create the company To The Market, and what types of services does To The Market provide?
Absolutely. So I started my career in a different sector. I worked for the US government in national security. And I was traveling and working all over the world and came away with this simple but for me profound conclusion that the most effective way to drive change was to leverage market forces. So I decided to I was at the State Department, but then also did an MBA at Columbia Business School to really understand, gosh, what are the largest industries in the world? And where are there industries that are big but broken? Because where there's brokenness, there's opportunity to make improvement and bring new solutions.
Right.
And I started studying retail manufacturing. So the production of goods that are included in the home and gifting industries, things like apparel, accessories, home goods, found it to be a multi-trillion-dollar industry on an annual basis, but an industry that was really in need of improving, evolution, operational improvements, societal improvements. And so I began to dig deeper through my work experiences and, working on a book, just a number of things to really come up with our business model To The Market. And what To The Market does is we focus on partnering with businesses, whether they're big or they're small, to help them manage and sort of vet and monitor their suppliers, as well as help them bring more technology to the procurement process so that they better understand how their goods are being made and whether that process aligns with their values. And then finally, we really help our clients do what's called impact reporting, meaning getting qualitative and quantitative information about the footprint of the production process of what they've either bought or they've manufactured themselves.
Before we go on, you've been using the word sustainable, and we use that a lot. But I want to clarify the use of the word sustainable, because in recent years, the Common Association of Sustainability has been sort of a blanket term relating predominantly to the preservation of the planet's environment. And certainly that's a part of what you do, a large part. But in your company's work and the business initiatives we're talking about today, the term sustainable has sort of turned into a broader and in ways more specific definition. Can you clarify how sustainability is used with regard to your business and in today's conversation?
Yeah, when we think sustainability, yes, we're talking about environmental sustainability, but we're also looking at ethical behavior, sort of social compliance. We're even looking at sort of broader risk mitigation. So it's more than just the footprint of the work that you're doing on the planet. We as a business are looking across sustainability, social compliance, business performance. And that is in response to some drivers that I know, Tom, you and I are going to talk about, that sort of the market, consumers, et cetera, are asking for.
I think it's to the market has been sort of prescient in terms of before anybody was talking about ESG. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, environment, social, and governance, which is the idea of looking at businesses across metrics, if you can call them that are not generally looked at as like bottom line, balance sheet metrics, to as Jane said, look at companies in terms of risk and other considerations and social change, of course. Why? Let's talk about sustainable sourcing and design and why it's important right now.
Yeah, it's more important than ever. And it's more important than ever because of pressure that businesses, whether they're brands, they are corporations, they are retailers, are under to respond to these pressures. And we sort of bucket them into sort of three themes, and we'll sort of unpack each one. So the first theme that is a huge, huge part of this, which is again market driven, is consumer pressure. So when we look at consumer pressure, what we're looking at are um, preferences of the consumer and what they are valuing in the market. What is something that attracts them to brands' products? What is dissuading them from engaging in brands' products? And what we have seen over the last decade, and it sort of accelerates as most things do, right? Where adoption typically is not sort of linear, it typically has sort of an accelerating sort of growth path, is people really value sustainability and they value ethical sort of work practices within a business. A few stats that I share with folks that I think do a good job of reflecting where we are. 9 out of 10 respondents that were polled by the World Economic Forum said that they would like to see more transparency in the way in which products are made, and would reward businesses accordingly. We also see very high rates of certain generations, 70 plus, that are choosing brands over other brands if they are sort of similarly priced and similarly category focused, that have a clear sort of sustainability or social compliance message within that. And the list goes on and on. I know you have a few, Tom, as well, but the stats show that across generations and across actually socioeconomic and political views, people are excited about sustainability or conservation.
It's true. I mean, our numbers are quite similar. I mean, when we look at the importance of we studied the value equation at Springboard Futures, and when we look at the importance of social responsibility, responses consumers who say it is somewhat to extremely important, 84% of Gen Z, 82% of millennials, 78% of Gen X, and boomers are just at about 70%. So it's, you see it escalating. You see the future generations, the people who are really starting to spend, those are the ones, and that's just the social part. Of course, environmental, we have, similar numbers. So we were actually really surprised how important the social part of it had become this year. When we look at environmental, 88% say it's somewhat to extremely important in terms of whether or not they decide to purchase an item. And again, 88% of Gen Z, 91% of millennials say it plays a part in the purchase decision, 85 and 85. So you're up at 85% for boomers and Gen X. It's a really important thing. And I think at the core of what what's so interesting about what To the Market does to me is that all of it is really focused on consumers. So, it's just funny in this series, whether we're talking about color, form, material, function, every single topic that we wind up talking about this series, and now it's sourcing and design, ends up at the consumer's doorstep. Why is that in your opinion? Why is the consumer so important right now to from the business perspective, where it's, business used to tell the consumer what to think, and now consumers are telling the business how to act?
Well, I think consumers have always been front and center, but what we're seeing now is people are less loyal to brands than they have been in the past, meaning that brands, whether you're a brand, a retailer, or corporation, are constantly having to recourt and recourt the consumer and having, right? And have
Yeah.
that consumer, if their interests have evolved as they are in sustainability and social compliance, the businesses have to evolve accordingly to retain them.
Yeah.
So I think that continues to be a huge, huge part of the pressure.
Mhm.
Another part of the pressure as to why we're seeing businesses really adjust to making more sustainable, ethical sourcing, buying decisions is that they're seeing pressure from their financial partners. Meaning, it could be your financial institution who's giving you access to a loan, doing a credit check. It's done in Bradstreet. That's sort of giving you a risk score, or maybe it's investors. If you're sort of we're a venture-backed business To the Market. We, of course, are constantly in diligence with investors. And what investors are looking for are things that mitigate their risk, and things that can help you mitigate your risk as a business is having a strong understanding of your supply chain, fundamentally understanding who's making your product, how it's being made, and whether you would feel good about wherever it's being made or how it's being profiled on the front page of the New York Times. So yes, consumer pressure for sure. From a secondary standpoint, we are seeing so many businesses make investments in understanding sustainable, ethical sourcing because of that sort of financial partner pressure.
Right. Well, and the financial partners are thinking that way because of things like cancel culture, where normally maybe somebody who's financing you wouldn't look at what some of your risk factors are because they're not on the bottom line. It's not about, supply chain management or anything like that. It's about the fact that if you're doing something that consumers get wind of or puts you at risk for, cancel culture, then you could really be shut down with
Yeah.
if something's exposed that's not normally something that a bank might look at.
Yes. There's certainly absolutely reputational risk.
Yeah.
And similarly, which ties to the third point of pressure, regulation
Yeah.
continues to grow in this space. And it ties to your financial partnerships, because if I'm a bank and I am giving you a line of credit, Tom, to run your business, and 50% of your shipment ends up being held at US Customs and then turned away, you're not able to meet your obligations. So that's also of serious interest. And the regulatory piece is quite interesting because whether you love it or you hate it, it's a space that continues to increase
Right.
in the sort of home and gift industry and in the sort of retail manufacturing space. And we're seeing the regulation increase across both sustainability related reporting and requirements, as well as social compliance. So, for example, we've seen a sort of steady drumbeat of what are called directives, which are the sort of the equivalent of national US legislation, meaning it's sort of across member states, that are forcing businesses, starting with sort of mid-sized businesses, but very quickly getting into small businesses to begin to report on their supply chains, social compliance, and sustainability footprint. Which it doesn't matter if you're domiciled in the US, if you desire to sell into a European customer, you will become, yeah, you will be required to begin reporting. So that is an example of the type of international regulation we're seeing. Closer to home, we had a bipartisan bill that went into effect called the U.S. Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which is designed to prevent the importation of products made by forced labor in China. And we've seen billions of dollars of goods held at US Customs and turned away because the product and the production process is deemed to be non-compliant. And it is for big businesses who you would think have all of the resources in the world to run compliance work, but perhaps are not, to very small businesses that are still having products seized or rejected. And so, whether you love it or you hate it, it's a reality that this continues to march forward. And so our opportunity then, working in the industry collectively, is to figure out how we can be competitive, how we can be compliant. What do we need to do to get ahead of this? So we're not sitting, October 31st with half of our holiday inventory at US Customs, and we're not able to hit any of our sort of goals because of our inability to access our product. And you could be the
I
store.
think, yeah, I mean, what you're describing is it's not only certainly a big business issue, but I think a lot of times we take it for granted. If you're a buyer, you're going into market and you go into a big company, you could be a small independent, but you're thinking we make the assumption that the larger companies that we deal with are doing their due diligence, are making sure that all of this, falls within standards and within current regulations. But all of a sudden your shipment's stuck and you're without product at peak season or any season.
Totally.
So you're right, every businesses of every size are affected, and whether you're a
How
supplier
often did
or
we see that
retail.
in COVID, right? Like these were not just brands
Yes,
suffered. These were retailers who had massive assortment holes because product couldn't get in.
right.
So yeah, whether you're
And
big, small, you're a retailer, you're a brand, paying attention to this is really important.
right. And new mandates are going into effect right now across the EU for this year. So as
Yes.
you said, it affects our ability to trade into there, whether or not we've got to hit certain EU standards now.
Yeah.
So. So you've done a terrific job of identifying the why of ethical, sustainable design and sourcing, but I want to talk a little bit about the how of it, because really product is where the rubber meets the road, right? So I'm sure for a lot of our listeners and viewers, the execution of that product, of responsible product and design is really daunting on a lot of different levels. To the markets, you've guided so many companies past those initial hurdles, and you've had really impressive results. Is there a particular approach that you recommend? I mean, which aspects of design and sourcing should be addressed first? What are the first things, or is there, a one, two, three? These are the three things
Yeah.
that you should be thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, well, I think from a sort of strategy standpoint, we should all accept that it's progress over perfection. We don't all have to turn into Patagonia to make progress. I mean, it could be starting with 5 or 10 or 15% of your assortment that you're introducing new sustainability practices or ethical production. Um, there's a place for all of us to start, and it's a constant journey where we're making improvements along the way. So much like dieting, it's important that you start small and you're consistent, and then there's opportunity to sort of grow in what your health journey looks like, right? So I say that
Well,
across the
consumer
board because it's
forgiveness
important.
seems to be high if the intent is there. When consumers see that a company has sort of gone off, if the intent to do right was a part of the equation, or
Yes.
if there's the consumer forgiveness or
Oh,
brand
totally.
shunning happens a lot less.
Totally. And creating goodwill. I mean, right?
Mhm.
Like all of us, when you look at sort of brand hierarchies and how people think about brand halos, one wants to create and store up goodwill so that when there are challenges that we inevitably all face, that you are tapping into that existing goodwill as sort of, for bartering.
Right.
All of that to say, there's sort of three things that we encourage folks to think about when they're thinking about how to sort of begin or continue their sustainable and ethical sourcing or buying practices. So the first sort of thematic focus area is thinking about country of origin for product.
Mhm.
And again, um, we can reflect on COVID and what happened when so many companies were so over-indexed in producing in a single country or buying from a single country and could not get access to their product.
Mhm.
So what does that mean for us? now, post sort of generally post COVID, is this idea that first of all, you want to have diversity in your vendor matrix, right? You want to have multiple places from which you can source. But second of all, it's helpful if you're sourcing from countries that already have strong labor and sustainability laws on the books, because it's reducing your risk that you're then going to take on by importing the good when it's sort of been made in the Wild West. So we encourage people to really think about producing in countries that have stronger compliance sort of regimens that don't necessarily have, significant political dynamics with the location that you're importing into. And that is a great way in which you can begin to lower your risk because you are, taking a more strategic approach to country allocation. So that's sort
You
of,
know, I want to take an aside here because you and I have had this conversation, and it's really important to state it right now. It's very easy for this to read as politics. It is
Mhm.
not politics. This is, we're not taking a stand on one way or the other of whether, ESG is right or wrong. It is what it is. All of this is about assessing risk, making smart choices that can keep, knowing what the groundwork is and probably what's coming, and anticipating that. It's not saying what's right or wrong or what country you should do business with. It's understanding what the consumer demands are and what governmental issues are playing into that as well. But I just want to say that because it's very easy to sort of read this in the wrong way. It's about
yeah,
preparing you for coming to market, really.
truly, truly. How does one stay competitive with the current landscape that we find ourselves working within?
Right.
Whether we like the changes in the landscape or we don't, we still want to be able to compete. So what do we need to do to compete? That should again be sort of the orientation that we collectively have. So country of origin, I think, is important, and it's more than just where you're doing full production. It's also the country of origin of your raw material.
Right.
So it's right, it's twofold. And that,
Good
in that
point.
realm of country of origin is, also thinking about sort of any regulatory dynamics that may be impacting that. What do I mean by that? Um, there are certain types of materials, for example, that are not allowed to be exported or imported into certain places. So getting smart on that, right? Like if I recall at the Home and Gift show, someone talking about, how devastated they were that glitter, I believe, can't be imported into the
Yes,
UK.
that was an interesting part of your
Yes.
presentation, the idea
But
of
yeah, yeah. So I mean, really understanding sort of country dynamics is an
can
important
you,
part.
now that you've mentioned it, you've probably got people wondering, say a little bit about what that was.
Well, my understanding, so it was told to me, but my understanding is that microplastics
Mhm.
are something that many countries are trying to sort of work on because it's very, very difficult to recycle, right? I mean, recycling glitter, I don't know how one would do that relative to recycling a plastic bottle where it's a much bigger sort of consistent product. So many
There are also
countries
groundwater
are.
issues, I mean, it's yeah, it's issues.
So there are efforts to reduce microplastics, and some of that is manifested as people not being able to import glitter, including, I think, in certain states in
Right.
the US now. All of that to say, the point is you don't want to be stuck with product you can't sell to sort of the intended location, right? That's never a good position to be in. And so, or that you can't import it because you paid for. So getting smart on sort of country dynamics is an important part of de-risking your supply chain. So that's sort of
It's
one.
this. It's the same as but for the home and housewares industry. Keep being aware of PFAS legislation.
Mhm.
It affects everything from materials to rugs to cookware. And it's moving at a good clip. It's something
Yes,
you have to be aware of.
totally. Yeah.
And your organization, just to clarify, because this is something that we spoke about before, your organization, you can take the role of advising a company on what legislation is currently going with their products. That's what they hire you, if that's what they hire you for, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Assuming that we're helping them source that good, absolutely. It falls on us to understand, whether that product can be imported into the country of destination and whether it could be exported.
Right.
Um, because there are all sorts of interesting dynamics that are surprisingly complicated and trying to get trim from point A to point B or whatever it is. So
Right.
yes, That's certainly something we help with. Second, second sort of thematic focus is this idea of looking at your materials. And it's your base material, and it's also your packaging and tagging material. There is great opportunity in beginning to implement some percentage of sort of more sustainable fabrications or more ethically sourced sort of product. What do I mean by ethically sourced? Think of, and we're not in sort of the food industry, but think of the idea of, do we want to have cacao that's from children, farmed by children, or do we want it farmed by,
Right.
adults? So when you think of materiality, you're thinking of both, yes, the sustainability footprint. So is there an opportunity for me to introduce a recycled fabrication in the mix? 30, 40, 50, 60%, maybe 100% of the product can be made in a recycled material, or a lower sort of lower impact material. There are all sorts of fascinating ways that people are coming up with, for example, non-traditional leathers, a pineapple leather,
Right.
there are all sorts of really neat fabrication innovations that are taking place. There's enough demand around certain fabrications, rPET, recycled cotton, organic cotton, that the cost per yard is pretty competitive, meaning that, really big businesses and small businesses are able to afford sourcing these. So that would be, a place that I really encourage people to look at, even if you're starting with 5, 10, or 15% of your assortment, thinking about how you can include more sustainable fabrications
Mhm.
is really a great opportunity to begin your journey.
And I think it's something that we can, whether you're a buyer or a retailer or even even buying from a textile manufacturer, I think we all have to push upwards to say that we need these materials because them integrating those materials into an assortment it brings the cost of it down so it's more accessible at lower price points as well. So it's not just the supplier's job to discover that, it's the retailer's job to request it and say that it's something that's desirable.
Totally. There's, yeah, a huge opportunity there to generate more demand and to reward people offering that by buying it when you see it available.
Right.
Yes, so that's sort of second, and that extends to, again, what I shared, tagging and packaging, right? Is looking at, introduction of more sustainable materials relative to their sort of conventional counterparts. The third is really looking at your factory footprint. And again, this is, of course, perhaps more top of mind for people in the business of sourcing and manufacturing, i.e. brands. But why this is important for retailers as well is because if you have an issue at the factory and then you end up carrying that good, you often can be a part of the sort of challenge that may be experienced when an issue is found, i.e., a hazardous material gets utilized and it ends up that you're selling that brand and that product in your store, and then you're in charge of having to do the recall because you have all the consumer data, for your sales. Or there's a big blowback around, some issue within some brand supply chain that you carry. And again, if you carry that brand, that blowback falls on you too. So all of this to say, understanding your factory, and we look at three parts when we look at a factory. We look at the sustainability footprint of a factory.
Mhm.
We look at the social compliance footprint of a factory, and we look at the business performance of a factory. And looking across all three, whether that's, using someone like To The Market to help you do that, or you're requesting certifications and audit outcomes, references, is really critical, because what you're doing is you're lowering the likelihood that you as a brand or as a store are going to, face sort of that concern from that end consumer.
Well, and again, this is something that To The Market is capable of doing.
Yes.
Because one of the things that I think I don't think it was necessarily obvious when I first met you, because your focus was your focus at the time was really on sort of specifics of sustainable behaviors, but to the market really is a sort of, you know, snout to tail, if you will, sort of a service offering where it's very, I mean, it's almost a la carte in a way. You know, if you work with clients and say, okay, this if this is what you need, we'll help you work with that. You know, we can help you work with sourcing, we can help you work with design, we can help you work, you know, and take it end to end and sort of say, you know, and I think that's really impressive. That's why you've gotten so many accolades, is because your business is very it's very vertical for a business of this sort. We can get a lot of people. There are a lot of people out there offering to do different parts of this, but it's quite unusual to see somebody who's willing to get in and really dig in and go end to end and help you get through the process of minimizing risk with all this. So just want to make
Yes,
sure.
we're focused on being a turnkey solution for our partners.
So I wanted to ask you one other thing, and that was, what are right now the most effective means of well, marketing these programs, you know, so that the end consumers actually see the benefits and advantages over other products, you know, because I think that one of the things that we look at is, we know that I think 86% of consumers say that if they were aware of both environmental and social benefit to buying a product, they
Mhm.
would prefer that product at the same price. So,
Mhm.
or at the same or relatively similar price points. So how do we show that? You know, how do we bring that forward to the consumer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a couple of ways that we can do it. So when you look at the physical good, so in person product, you have things like hang tags, sew-in tags, packaging, inserts, where you have an opportunity to do storytelling on both the
Mhm.
material, the story behind the good, the factory or supplier that created that. um, Consumers really respond to understanding who's making their product and how it's being made. It's part of the romance of
Yeah,
buying
story is so important. It's incredibly important. And I think sometimes when we're talking about all these, you know, we're talking about materials, we're talking about percentages and all of this, and legislation, it seems very technical, but at the end of the day, the consumer does really respond to story. So
totally. I mean,
yeah.
and when it feels like it's so easy to access so much, and it can almost feel like all of our work is almost like commoditized, this is such an opportunity to have points of differentiation.
Mhm.
If you can tell the story of the product, and especially in the home and gift industry, where people desire to buy something and then be able to say, and what's so special about this is that, this sort of community of artisans made it, or it was made with this type of material, or this technique is common in this part of the world. I mean, that is what's so interesting
I'm
about.
gonna actually, I'm gonna show the image of the program that you did with Bloomingdale's
Yeah.
just a short while back, and I want you to talk about it because it was so impressive. It was one of the first things that I saw with this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so Bloomingdale's was supporting Disney's launch of The Lion King, sort of the live action Lion King, and they very brilliantly wanted to have authentic product that was from sub-Saharan Africa, which is where the Lion King story takes place. And so they partnered with To the Market to make that happen. And what was so exciting about that partnership is that you had incredible product that was unique, because of, where it came from, but you also had such extraordinary opportunity for storytelling, both in physical good, as well as digitally. And we were able to not only sort of provide narrative on, how a product was made, or, why this technique is specific to this country, but also provide really compelling statistics, things like this many fair wage hours were created through, this project, and this many women got to be employed during this project, and this many countries were utilized for sourcing. And
Mhm.
again, that's the type of specificity that consumers are interested in. They want more specifics than sort of super broad brushstroke statements like we care about the planet, or we give
Right.
back
Right.
1% proceeds
That's
to XYZ. I mean, people want more than that.
we're definitely seeing, yeah, we've reported on that. Mintel's reported on that, that people want specifics. We've moved beyond we're saving the planet, we're saving the seas, we're saving whales, or whatever it is. So they want not just to see what you've done to make that save, but also what's the benefit? Where was it? Where is it now? What has been how much have you changed? How many people have you given work to? How many, trees or rainforest acreage have you saved? All of that sort of thing. It's gotten to the specific. But I think the other thing I wanted to mention about storytelling, just to go back for a minute, is the storytelling doesn't have to be about craftsmanship. It can be about the design process. It can
Totally.
be about, new materials. It can be very vivid and very, and still be about something that's really engaging. It depends on who your audience is for your product.
Yeah.
Impact reporting. So one of the big things that we're seeing is all of this ESG moves forward, and people prepare for legislation or see the value of just sort of making sure that they're prepared for, whether they're in a finance, whether it's meeting legislation, is the idea of impact reports. How do you all deal with that?
Well, I think what's so interesting about impact reports is it allows for you to provide sort of a definitive narrative over the course of a year as to what your business has done, beyond just sort of commercial transactions.
Mhm.
So we see everything from, really compelling but very concise emails that companies send out with high level stats around, the type of, for example, I'm a Run the Runway subscriber and to their membership. And I get these sort of end of year emails that aren't particularly long, but they're specific to me. And they let me know how many items I ordered and what my impact would be if I had actually bought that many items and then used
Really?
average time. Yeah, which is so cool. And I love seeing that. And it keeps me coming back to Rent the Runway because I realize the impact I as a consumer am having by switching to, rentals for a portion of my sort of purchasing, relative to if I'm constantly buying and then sort of giving it away or donating it or throwing it away as so many folks end up doing. And so sometimes it's a short sort of narrative. Sometimes it's an opportunity to do a much longer document that people are articulating the changes they're making, the investments they're making. And people are reading these documents and they're making choices to engage with the company because of them. So it it's
It's funny.
opportunity to
Sorry.
connect better to your consumer, right? Like you
I
get
think
to,
also it's great to see when we look at that, whatever industry you're in, when you look at that, and it can give you ideas for your own industry, and understanding that consumers are seeing this and expecting that type of. I mean, an impact report is really just a story about you. I mean, it takes the impact of you personally, but also the impact of the company on all consumers. If you look at a company called Cherish, Charish. I know you know the company, Jane, but they sell secondhand furniture, restored furniture, accessories, things like that. And when you look at the annual report that they do, which is sent to consumers, it says, look, this is how many of each generation feels like secondhand gifting is cool and chic, and and the types of things that they give. And those things are not just guiding consumers, they're also guiding industries. They're so informative, those things. And you had mentioned before, QR codes. They're such a great way to tell a story without printing a ton, and very, very really accepted video right now. You can jump to a video talking about these things, and video is the number one mode of communication preferred across generations.
yeah,
With the richest generations influentially, Gen Z and millennials, and with the richest generation physically, boomers, it's still the most, the most preferred mode of communication. So it's important to get in there too.
yeah, I believe it.
Well, Jane, this has been informative. It's been inspiring. Thank you so much for clarifying what's been a very complex and crucial supply side issue, and also for giving us some actionable information and some new solutions. For those of you who wish to contact Jane Mosbacher Morris to learn more about To The Market or just ask her a question, you can reach her at www.tothemarket.com. I'm Tom Mirabile, and on behalf of the Inspired Home Show and Springboard Futures, thanks for spending time with us at Design Driven. Jane, thank you again.
Thank you, Tom.